Welcome back to Waters Ironworks. Today we're going to be taking a look at recreating one of the very first tools that I made as a beginning blacksmith, which was this nail header that I made out of a railroad spike. So we'll take a look at how to turn this, or really anything that's about the same size, into a pretty serviceable nail header that you can then make nails with. We'll look at the nail making process in a future video, as well as talk about a book on nail making and the history of nail making. It's a deeply fascinating subject if, like me, you like things that are kind of boring. So I think this will be a good time. Before we jump into just hammering away on this and turning it into a nail header, let's talk a little bit about some of the essential things that you need when you're making a nail header. So there's a kind of couple key things we're going to want to keep in mind. The first is that we want a bit of a dome where our nail is going to go into. And what this does is it lets us come in with angled hammer blows, put a decorative head on the nail. So we'll look at how we do this. It's pretty much a ball peen hammer from the back side of it. Will give us a bit of a dome. The second is we don't want our nail to get caught in the nail header, which is a pretty common occurrence if you don't design these things correctly. Basically, we're going to want kind of an hourglass shape to our nail header. This allows you to go in, set the head, and nothing's going to get caught or bound down in the bottom of it. So we'll put a little bit of an hourglass shape in it. We'll make sure that these edges are rounded on it. And it's really as simple as that. The nail header that I made originally, and we're going to make today, is for a single nail of a specific size. You also commonly see nail headers with 2 or 3 holes in them for different size nails. One thing I do really like about this one that I made compared to some other homemade nail headers I've seen, or blacksmith made nail headers, is it's got a nice long handle on it so that my hand stays well away from the anvil, and it's got a little bit of a heft to it. I've seen some smaller ones, and when you're going in to do those blows on the nail, it can be really jarring on the hand. So a little bit of extra length, a little bit of extra weight to it will make it a much more comfortable tool to use. I also like having the loop on it a lot. You put your nail, you head it in there, it's hot. You can use that to quench it very easily. So the little bit of extra length is nice for that as well. So let's get the forge fired up, and we'll take a look at how to turn this into this. See you guys once the forge is going. The forge is hot, about ready to pull the spike out that we're going to be working on, but wanted to talk a little bit about the first things that we're going to do, and that is turning the head of the spike into the head of the nail header. It's not an especially difficult process. We're upsetting this material back in on itself. The only kind of challenges are these edges are pretty thin, so you need to be careful as you upset this back into itself that you don't do a lot of folding over on it. So some good solid blows in the right direction will help with that. You will get a little bit of folding over probably for an application like this. If there's a couple lines in there, it's not going to hurt anything, right? This will be a pretty beefy nail header, and the amount of impact it's going to take from the nail heading is not going to cause any problems if you don't get these completely upset back into themselves. You could, if you wanted, I'm not for this one, go in once you've got everything kind of upset, get it up to welding heat, and just weld everything together into a nice solid compact mass. I've done it sometimes. I think it's kind of overkill in this situation. So we will focus on probably the sides here, upsetting those in a little bit first, and then coming down and upsetting this face back in, trying to get all of this as a nice blob here on the end of the railroad spike. These can be a little hard to hold. You can make railroad spike specific tongs which will go in and grip it. In this situation, I'm going to be using a pair of wolf jaw tongs to hold this. I'll forge the head down like we were talking about, and then that'll give me a spot to hold it on the other side when I go in for the drawing out activities in a little bit. So let's pull this out and take a look at it. So you can see really what I'm doing here is I'm trying to drive these edges back in without getting any folds. Holding the railroad spike at a little bit of an angle just to encourage that, and that's looking pretty good. I'm going to get probably a little bit of a line there, but that's okay. There's a little bit of heat left in here for this upsetting though, to make it go smoother, make it go faster. I really want to work this while it's hot, so we're going to reheat this. Come in here and flatten this out just a little bit more. Now we'll come in, give this a couple blows just to kind of straighten everything out here a little bit. And I think with that heat, that's all I'm going to do. We'll get this hot again and just keep driving this material back down in on itself until we get a nice cube there on the end. So we've got some fish lipping going on now. This is starting to swell on the back and the front. We do want to make sure that we keep that nice and flat. That's a very easy way to start getting folds. Put this in, heat it up again. Go a little bit more, but that's coming along pretty nicely. So I've got this about where I want it now. We've driven that head of the railroad spike back into the body. You can see there's a couple little lines there. Those are just on the surface. I could take them to a grinder and grind those out if I wanted, but again, I'm not going to worry about it. The next step will be flattening this out and widening it. I want to just work with kind of the material that I've got here that was part of the nail head. So we'll heat this up one more time and come in and start flattening it out. We'll probably start with some half on, half off blows here, really kind of shrinking this portion of it, leaving the body of the railroad spike alone. here. Alright, so I think this is looking pretty good. We've got enough space for our nail header there. The next step is going to be drawing all this out, and we want to really draw it out pretty substantially. We also don't, when we're done, want this big lump at the end. So now that I've got a spot I can hold it on the other side with my tongs, we'll draw all this out and give us some length. So the goal here is just to continue drawing it out over the edge to make it a little bit faster. You guys have all seen this before, so show you a little bit of the process, but we'll come back to you when we've mostly got it finished here. So I broke out the guillotine, which you've seen in one of my review videos, to put a little necking in there to help isolate the head from the rest of the body. So I'll continue drawing this out, smooth this out a little bit, and focus everything back behind that neck. So we've got this in the shape that I want. It's a little shorter than the first one. The length on these is not super important. One thing I did do is I went in and I knocked all the edges in rather than leaving them sharp like I did on this first one. That'll make it a little bit more comfortable to hold, which will be nice. So we're at the point now where we need to work on the head here, and there's a couple things we need to do. We need to put a hole in it, we need to drift it to size, and then we need to round it. You could punch and drift this. It's a pretty small hole we're making, and I don't have a punch that small. So what I'm actually going to do is grab a drill, put a hole through there, and then I'll use that hole with a nail-sized drift in order to go and drift that to its final size. Once I've got it about the size I want, then I'll go in and I'll shape this, I'll round it out, and then we'll do some final drifting and cleanup on it. So I'm going to quench this, drill a hole in it, get it hot again, and then we'll take a look at the drifting process. I've got an 1/8 inch hole drilled in there. I'm going to be making nails at a 1/4 inch stock. And so the next step will be making a small nail-like drift out of some of this 1/4 inch stock, getting this hot and putting it through there. I will need to take it to a pretty fine point since that's a small hole there. But let's get this hot, let's make the drift, and I'll show you how to drift it. We're basically going to make a nail for this drift, come to the edge, get a nice little point on it there. This off right about here. Since this is so small, I don't want it to be too long or it's going to want to bend on me. I would also normally take my drift and upset it, but with this one-time use and so small, I'm not going to bother doing that. So let's go ahead and quench this, We'll wait for the nail header to finish heating up, and then we'll drive this through it. I will grind this end down a little bit, maybe grind off a little bit of the back just so it'll have a tendency to drop through. A little warm. Now, because I didn't really go in and upset this and make it a little bit bigger, they do tend to get stuck a little bit like that. That's easy enough to drive right back out. Also did not, and I did this on my first one too, get it exactly in line with the handle. That's something to watch out for. They are nicer if your hole is squared up with the back end of the handle there. Let's heat this up again, and what we're going to do next is round it out a little bit, basically with a ball peen hammer. Set the ball peen hammer where we want our dent to be. Go in there and round it up nicely. We don't need a crazy amount of rounding on it, so I think that's probably pretty good. The next step is we're going to come back in and we're going to re-drift that one more time just to make sure as we round it like that, it's going to deform our hole. Re-drifting it will make sure that it stays nice and square. We will have to be a little careful though, because we don't want to flatten it out as we're doing that re-drifting. That looks pretty good. So next step is I am going to quench this, and then we're going to do a little bit of file work on it just to open up those edges a little bit. I couldn't find my small file, so I haven't been able to get in and file these out. What I would do is take it and file these edges down a little bit, round them over, do the same thing on the underside, and then it'd be in good shape. But it's perfectly usable like this. So what we'll do is next week we'll take this nail header that we just made and we'll make a couple nails with it. Nails are a great practice for a beginning blacksmith or even advanced blacksmith. If you want to get good at putting a point and drawing things out, you can't go wrong with nails. There's one final thing that we're going to do to finish this up. I should have drifted my nail drift a little bit smaller than I did. So all we're going to do is come in and close this hole up a little bit. We'll do that just by using a small ball peen hammer, hammering around the edges of it. Looks pretty good. It's closed up a little bit there at the top now. Should still be filed, but I think this is ready to make nails. If you don't want to do this little bit of extra hammering here at the end, then the right thing to do would be take your 1/4 inch square stock that you're making your drift from, just bring it out a little bit thinner. You want this to be less than 1/4 of an inch so that when you drop your nail in it, it sits, that 1/4 inch piece gets stuck before it goes through, and then you can hammer it down and form your nail head. I think with this little bit of adjustment, we're perfect, and we're ready to go make some nails next week. So make sure that you like and subscribe, and I'll see you then. Thanks so much. Happy forging.